That right there is a Ukrainian-built cruise missile, Flamingo. Designed in Ukraine, built in Ukraine, launched from Ukrainian soil. And it is hitting targets over 1,000 kilometers inside Russia. The kind of targets that, 4 years ago, nobody in the world believed Ukraine could ever reach. And look at where Ukraine is right now. They don't let Russians take a breath before another launch. As we mark 4 years since Russia launched the largest ground invasion in Europe since World War II. Tonight, we are going to talk about what Ukraine destroyed, what Ukraine built, and where all of this is actually heading. Because here is what I want you to understand before we are done tonight. Ukraine should not exist right now. By the logic of every war game, every intelligence assessment, every military analyst who ran the numbers in the winter of 2022. The consensus in Washington, London, and Brussels was that Kyiv would fall within days. And not only did that not happen, Ukraine has spent the last 4 years methodically dismantling the military that was supposed to erase it, while simultaneously building something that the entire Western defense industry is now trying to reverse engineer. That is the story. Let's get into it. Welcome to the War Update. February 24th, 2022. Russia launches simultaneous strikes against nearly every major Ukrainian city. Kharkiv, Kyiv, Dnipro, Mariupol, Odessa, all of them hit within hours. Russian armored columns cross the border from Belarus in the north, from Russia in the east, from Crimea in the south. The operation is designed to be over in days. Decapitate the government, install a puppet, absorb the country, clean and fast. The United States reportedly offered President Zelensky evacuation. His response became one of the most quoted lines of the decade. "I need ammunition, not a ride." But before we get to what happened next, before we get to the drones and the deep strikes and the 4 years of attrition, I want to go back to something that happened in early April 2022 that almost nobody was paying attention to at the time. Russia is 1 month into its invasion. It is still raining missiles on Ukrainian cities. Mariupol is burning. The world's attention is on whether Ukraine can hold the Kyiv suburbs. And quietly, with almost no announcement, Ukraine sends a pair of Mi-24 attack helicopters 10 kilometers across the Russian border at low altitude and puts 2 missiles into a fuel depot in Belgorod region. That moment was not important because of the fuel. It was important because of the message. Ukraine was, even at its most vulnerable, even with its back against the wall, already thinking about how to take this war to Russian soil. That instinct, that willingness to carry the fight forward rather than simply absorb it, turned out to be the defining characteristic of everything that followed. Nobody in the Western press really understood what they were watching. Let's talk about what 4 years of war actually produces in terms of cold, hard numbers. Because the numbers are staggering, and they tell a story that the daily headlines consistently fail to convey. According to Ukrainian military sources and open-source intelligence tracking, figures that are conservative, based only on what can be visually confirmed, Russia has lost over 1.2 million military personnel, killed, wounded, or captured, 800,000. The United States lost approximately 58,000 soldiers over 20 years in Vietnam. Russia has been absorbing casualties at a rate that dwarfs that figure on a monthly basis. In terms of equipment, over 35,000 armored vehicles destroyed or captured, more than 430 aircraft, more than 340 helicopters, 29 naval vessels, including the Moskva, the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, sunk by Ukrainian Neptune anti-ship missiles in April 2022. Ukraine does not have a navy, but Ukraine did sink Russia's flagship. And here is the number that I think puts all of this in context. Russia has not meaningfully advanced on any major strategic axis in over 18 months. It is grinding forward, yes, a few kilometers here, a village there, at the cost of hundreds of soldiers per day and equipment losses that its production lines are struggling to replace. That is not a war Russia is winning. That is a war Russia is surviving, barely. Now, we get to the part that most coverage misses entirely. And I want to slow down here, because this is genuinely the most remarkable military-industrial story of the 21st century so far. In January 2022, 6 weeks before the invasion, Ukraine had no strategic domestic weapons production to speak of. Yes, there was Ukroboronprom, the state defense conglomerate. Yes, they produced some artillery, some armored vehicles, some small arms. But long-range strike capability, indigenous drone warfare at scale, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, none of it. Russia, on the other hand, had been preparing for this war for 30 years. Not an exaggeration. 30 years of rebuilding Soviet military doctrine, modernizing missile programs, expanding a defense industrial complex that was a structural pillar of the entire Russian economy. They had the stockpiles, the production capacity, the trained personnel, and the strategic depth that comes from decades of deliberate preparation. And Ukraine, starting from essentially nothing in the middle of an active war, built an arsenal that has fundamentally changed what this conflict looks like. First-person view drones, FPV drones, Ukraine now produces tens of thousands per month. These are cheap, fast, lethal, and they have changed frontline warfare more profoundly than any single conventional weapon system. They have effectively made large, slow armored vehicles extremely vulnerable in ways that no one fully predicted before this war. But that is just the beginning. Ukraine has built and deployed long-range one-way attack drones that have struck targets over 1,500 kilometers inside Russian territory. Moscow has been hit. Engels Air Base, the home of Russia's strategic nuclear bomber fleet, has been struck multiple times. Ukrainian drones have reached the Kremlin. The Kremlin. That is not a metaphor. Ukrainian-built unmanned aircraft flew over Russian air defenses and hit the seat of Russian government. Maritime drones. This one deserves its own moment. Ukraine developed a fleet of naval surface drones. The Sea Baby and the Magura V5 are the best known, and used them to destroy or damage more than a dozen Russian warships. The practical effect of this has been to push Russia's Black Sea fleet out of the Western Black Sea entirely. Ukraine, a country with no functional navy, won a naval campaign. And as a direct result, grain export corridors reopened and Ukraine was able to restore a significant portion of its maritime trade despite having no surface warships of its own. Cruise missiles. Ukraine has adapted the Neptune, originally designed as an anti-ship weapon, the same missile that sank the Moskva, into a land attack variant. Ukraine is now manufacturing its own cruise missiles. 4 years ago, this capability did not exist. Ballistic missiles. Ukraine has confirmed the development and combat use of domestically produced ballistic weapons. The Palyanitsa, a jet engine-powered missile with ballistic characteristics, has been used in combat. A ballistic missile program built from scratch inside a country that is simultaneously being bombarded daily in under 4 years. And here is perhaps the most telling data point of all. Every major Western defense contractor, from Polish firms to German manufacturers to British defense companies to South Korean industrial giants, is now actively seeking partnerships with Ukrainian engineers. They want the drone technology. They want the electronic warfare systems. They want the targeting software. They want to understand how Ukraine figured out things that NATO's best-funded research programs hadn't cracked. Ukraine went from military consumer to military innovator in 4 years of war. Not in spite of the pressure, because of it. Here is something that genuinely frustrated me throughout the first 2 years of this war, and I think it should frustrate you too. For a long time, Ukraine was not permitted to use Western-supplied weapons to strike targets inside Russia. American ATACMS missiles, too escalatory. British and French Storm Shadow cruise missiles, concerns were raised. The answer from Washington and Brussels, repeated endlessly, was some variation of, "We are deeply concerned about the risk of escalation." Deeply concerned. While Russia was deliberately targeting Ukrainian hospitals, apartment buildings, power plants, and kindergartens, Ukraine eventually received some of those permissions. Limited, carefully managed, restricted to specific target categories near the border. ATACMS were eventually authorized. Some Storm Shadow usage was permitted, but it came slowly, grudgingly, and always with constraints. So Ukraine did what Ukraine does. It built its own weapons that don't require anyone's authorization to use. and it started hitting Russia in ways that the permission givers had been too nervous to allow. Ukrainian drones have struck oil refineries in Saratov, Ryazan, and Krasnodar, facilities that process the fuel that powers Russian military vehicles and generates the export revenue that funds the war. They have hit ammunition depots in Voronezh, Bryansk, and Rostov, causing secondary explosions that destroyed months of accumulated stockpiles. They have struck military airfields in Engels, Pskov, and Morozovsk, damaging and destroying aircraft that Russia needs badly and cannot quickly replace. They have hit defense production facilities, radar installations, military command infrastructure. The economic damage from Ukrainian strikes inside Russia runs into the billions of dollars. Not estimates, measurable damage to refining capacity, to logistics networks, to weapons production timelines. Russia's ability to process and export oil has been meaningfully degraded. That is money that does not flow to the Russian military. That is a feedback loop that compounds over time. And the strategic point that rarely gets stated plainly: Russia cannot sustain this rate of loss. It is not replacing equipment as fast as it is losing it. It is not replacing soldiers as fast as it is losing them. And it cannot protect its own territory from the country it invaded. That last part, psychologically and militarily, matters enormously. The entire premise of Russia's war was that it would be fought on Ukrainian territory. That premise has been shattered. I want to be honest about something. Russia does have allies in this war, and they are real, and they matter. Iran has supplied Russia with Shahed 136 loitering munitions, what Russia relabels as Garand II, in enormous numbers. These are cheap, slow, loud drones, and Russia has used them to wear down Ukrainian air defenses by sheer volume. Ukraine has shot down thousands of them. Thousands. Ukrainian air defense has gotten so effective against Shahed waves that it is now routine for Ukrainian forces to intercept 80 to 90% of an incoming attack in a single night. But the attrition on missiles and air defense components adds up, and that is Iran's contribution to keeping this war going. North Korea. This one is genuinely alarming in a way that I don't think has fully landed in public consciousness. Kim Jong-un has sent Russia over 1 million artillery shells, a critical contribution given Russia's consumption rate. And beyond that, confirmed by multiple Western intelligence services and corroborated by visual evidence, North Korea has deployed at least 17,000 soldiers to fight in Russia's Kursk campaign. North Korean troops are dying on European soil right now, today, in 2026. Think about that for a moment. A hereditary Stalinist dictatorship in Northeast Asia is sending its soldiers to die in Ukraine to help a nuclear power prosecute a war of territorial conquest. The geopolitical implications of that alone deserve several episodes. China officially sells nothing to Russia's military. In practice, Beijing provides the microelectronics, the machine tools, the optical components, and the dual-use industrial goods that keep Russian weapons production running. This is documented by Western intelligence agencies, by customs data analysis, by investigative journalists who have tracked the supply chains. It is not a theory. China is sustaining Russia's war-making capacity at an industrial level, while maintaining diplomatic deniability. So Russia has China's supply chains, North Korea's manpower, and Iran's drones, and Ukraine is still here, still advancing in some sectors, still striking deep. Russia has struck Ukrainian power infrastructure hundreds of times across these 4 years. Thermal power plants, substations, hydroelectric dams. The Kakhovka Dam deliberately destroyed in June 2023, causing an environmental catastrophe that displaced hundreds of thousands of people and flooded hundreds of kilometers of river valley. Millions of Ukrainians have spent multiple winters without reliable electricity or heat, sometimes for weeks at a time. This is not incidental. This is a documented strategy. The logic is straightforward. Collapse the civilian infrastructure, break morale, make the cost of resistance higher than the cost of surrender, force capitulation. It has not worked, and there is a reason for that which has nothing to do with Ukrainian exceptionalism. It has to do with history. During World War II, Nazi Germany bombed London on 57 consecutive nights. The Blitz. Tens of thousands of British civilians killed. Entire neighborhoods erased. St. Paul's Cathedral standing in a sea of rubble. The German Air Force flew over London every single night for the better part of 2 months. And the strategy was exactly the same as Russia's strategy against Ukraine today. Break the civilian will to resist, and the government will have no choice but to negotiate. Britain did not surrender. British morale did not collapse. Winston Churchill did not ask for terms. If anything, the bombing hardened British resolve in a way that probably extended the war and made German defeat more, not less, certain. Strategic bombing of civilian populations has never caused a functioning society with genuine stakes in the outcome to surrender. Not London, not Leningrad, which endured a 900-day siege and starvation and still didn't fall. Not Vietnam, bombed more heavily in tonnage than Europe in World War II. Not Belgrade in 1999. The historical record on this question is not ambiguous. Bombing civilians prolongs wars. It does not end them. And in Ukraine's specific case, every Russian missile that hits a Ukrainian apartment building, or a Ukrainian maternity ward, or a Ukrainian power station does something that no military recruitment campaign could ever achieve. It permanently removes any remaining constituency for compromise. Ukraine is not going to tire of this war. It is being made incapable of tiring of it. 4 years in, let's look at where Russia actually stands. Not where Russian state media says it stands, not where the most optimistic Ukrainian briefings say it stands, but where the underlying indicators point. Russia's economy is on a full war footing that it cannot sustain indefinitely. The central bank raised interest rates to 21% in late 2024, the highest since the chaos of the post-Soviet 1990s. Inflation is accelerating. The ruble has depreciated significantly. Consumer goods are increasingly difficult to source. The labor market is in crisis because so many working-age men have been killed, maimed, fled the country, or locked into military contracts. Oil revenue, the structural foundation of the Russian state for the past 25 years, is being squeezed from 2 directions simultaneously. Western sanctions restricting where Russia can sell, and Ukrainian drone strikes degrading the refining infrastructure that processes the oil for export. Both of those pressures are getting worse, not better, as Ukraine's long-range strike capability continues to improve. And then there is the demographic question, which is the one that keeps serious analysts up at night. Russia has lost somewhere between 230,000 and 430,000 men, killed in action, over 4 years. The wounded figure is typically 3 to 4 times the killed figure, so we are talking about somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million men who are dead, permanently disabled, or severely injured. The precise figures are uncertain, but the order of magnitude is not. These are disproportionately young men from working-age cohorts. In addition, an estimated 1.3 million Russians, many of them educated, economically productive, and specifically the demographic least likely to support this war, fled Russia following the 2022 mobilization announcement. That brain drain is permanent. Those people are not coming back. This is not a country on a path toward victory. This is a country consuming itself. 4 years ago, the question that every analyst, every journalist, every government in the Western world was asking was, how long can Ukraine hold on? Nobody is asking that question anymore. The question now is different, and it is being asked in Moscow, not Kyiv. 4 years. Let me leave you with the shape of what has happened. 4 years ago, Ukraine had no long-range strike capability, no domestic drone industry, no cruise missile production, no maritime drone fleet, and no ballistic missile program. Its military was considered, generously, a capable regional force that would be overwhelmed by a serious Russian offensive within days. Every major intelligence service in the world got that wrong. Today, Ukraine manufactures drones that can reach Moscow. It has sunk a navy it was never supposed to be able to challenge. It has destroyed more Russian military hardware than most countries on Earth possess in total. It has built a defense industry that NATO members are actively studying and trying to replicate. It has, and I want to be precise here, not just survived a war against a nuclear power that spent 30 years preparing to fight it. It has made nuclear power bleed at a rate that is structurally unsustainable. Russia has China's money and industrial capacity behind it. It has North Korea's artillery shells and North Korean soldiers dying in European fields. It has Iranian drones coming in waves every night. And with all of that, with all of those advantages, it still cannot subdue a country of 40 million people that started this war with almost nothing in the way of strategic weapons. There is only one honest conclusion you can draw from that fact. 4 years in, Ukraine is still here, still building and definitely still striking. Thank you for watching the War Update. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analysis. Don't forget to hit a like button, and we'll see you in the next one.